I'm getting spooled. No, you're not. I'm getting spooled. Oh, shit, you are getting spooled. All right, hang on a sec. I better get after this one.
What were some of those little things that you saw that they did differently?
Dropping down in litre size. Started pulling it out of the water and going, okay, yeah, it got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Yeah, and it was a sneaky little technique that made such a difference.
Glen Booth.
Hello, how you going?
Welcome to the Long Corner.
Thank you.
Mate, thank you for coming in this morning. We're knocking this one out pretty early in the day, but just sort of give you a little bit of a brief introduction here. You probably best known as from your time as editor of Modern Fishing magazine, which lasted for what, sort of 10 or 15 years you were editor of that magazine?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
That was from what, the late 80s to around 2000?
Moved to Sydney in 86, I think it was, yeah.
And that was when you started at the magazine?
Assistant editor, then a bit of a break, and then came back as editor for however long. So, yeah.
Yep. And that was in the days of fishing magazines being the primary form of communication for the
sure.
fishing community.
Yep.
And they were, I know as a kid, I couldn't wait till the end of the month when all the new mags came out and raced down to the newsagent.
Yeah. Actually, one thing I learnt from the Complete Angler, one of the Complete Angler stores, was which magazine got on the table next to the cash register first, sold out, and the second one struggled.
Really?
Yeah, like absolute gold banquet. This is how you sell magazines, is being the first one out for the month, and particularly city customers a bit bored at lunchtime. Oh, new magazine, fantastic. So so if you were first out in the month, you sold really well. If you were second out, not so well. So
and then it tapered off after that.
Yep.
So was Modern Fishing first?
Yeah.
There you go.
And at the start of the second week of the month. So, and sometimes the start of the month. Well, sorry, no, probably the start of the previous month. So if it was a July issue, if you came out the start of the fourth week in June, you killed it. So, yeah, which is always why they were quite strict with deadlines and stuff. So, it's funny little observations that people make that, we wouldn't have had any idea about. And then, all of a sudden we go, oh, well, that's a...
Better pay attention to this.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah. So they all help.
Yeah, I mean, it's, I guess these days it's a little bit of a sad thing to see. I guess even the last of the fishing mags, I think, are gone now. And this sort of thing's become the new medium for communication, which is good in a way as well. But, fishing magazines were certainly my education growing up. And, it's a bit of a sad thing they're not around anymore. But anyway, we're here doing this. And additionally to a pretty long career in magazine publishing, you also wrote the book on game fishing.
Yep,
the complete guide to game fishing. Yeah,
or the incomplete guide, as I referred to it as. So yeah,
what year? That was obviously co-authored with Al McGlashan. But what year did that come out?
It's probably 10 years ago or more now. And as soon as it was finished, there was so many more things you could be talking about. Like,
new techniques.
Like new braid backing and all that sort of stuff. It was just, and electronics, of course, is just. Yeah, that's a book in itself, really.
Absolutely.
And as quick as you write it, it'll be, largely obsolete because, the technology is just marching forward so quickly that, and just this year, Omni's the buzzword in game fishing circles, and, you think, oh, well, that Omni's worth more than my boat and my car and half my fishing tackle, and I'll go, well, I'm not getting one anytime soon unless they make a small boat,
smaller Omni, or buy a bigger boat.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So, and win lotto. So,
you might need that with it. So, obviously a long and quite distinguished career in writing. That's right. You've also moonlighted as a professional crewman in the Cairns fishery and other locations up and down the East Coast throughout your time.
Yep.
worked with some of sort of Australia's best known captains and other crewmen. So you've got some experience on the professional side of the fence, and also still the current holder of the Australian record striped marlin on 8 kilo line at 106 kilos. So that, I believe at the time, that was a world record when you caught it.
Yeah, it was. I think it stood for about a year, and then a mate of mine in New Zealand, Sam Mossman, he deliberately targeted it.
Of course.
But I think his took 5 hours, and I think it was 113. And since then, like, New Zealand just owns the 8 kilo record. We don't really see enough big fish here to get it back. It's 174 now, so yeah.
That's a pretty big
and
fish.
I don't doubt that we couldn't catch it on 8 here, but it's finding the right fish sort of thing.
150 plus kilo striped marlin are pretty few and far between in our waters.
I mean, the place to do it would be down at Bermagui in winter, and you get some serious ones then. You get bigger ones, in the regular months of the year, sort of when the bite's on. But, as terrible as it sounds, you got to wade through a lot of 60, 70, 80 kilo, 90 kilo fish to find the one. And we whacked one a couple of years later that I think was 98 and had all the proportions of a bigger fish until it got down to the anal fin, and then the tail section just fell away, and you went, oh, okay, all right, well, anyway, so that was it. But that was great fun, and it was a big learning curve for us all about tackling techniques and what to do and how to do it, and so it's still the Australian record.
I had a look earlier. So you caught that. Actually, we're almost in another month's time at the 32-year anniversary of you catching that fish. That was 1994, mate.
Yeah,
so it's still standing today, which is, that's an impressive one. And I do remember, maybe 15 years ago or so, in fact, I got stuck on the rod on a fish in the middle of winter off Sydney that was on 8 kilo line because I like to do silly things, and we had a fish that was sort of somewhere in that ballpark, and I remember at the time thinking, I might be ringing Boothie soon and giving him the unfortunate news. But after about 7 hours, it got to sort of 10 o'clock on a Sunday night, and we realised we've got to go to work in the morning. But yeah, mate, that's a really impressive fish on 8, and they don't come easy. And I'm sure, I guess while we're talking about it, maybe we should expand on that a little bit, because I know that sort of became a bit of an annual campaign that yourself and sort of a small group of guys started purposely targeting that 8 kilo world record, and that was out of Bermagui. So how did that whole sort of campaign come about?
Well, initially it was just me, and then sort of talking to Ian Miller and Steve Starling about it, how much fun it was, and they said, oh, well, we might come down for next year for 4 days, and mate of ours from Canberra, Nick Haradimas, he came down as well, and so basically, we're putting up a day's charter fees, so we get 4 days fishing in, and we gradually refined our techniques and everything with Graham Baker and Rick Bedford at Bermagui on the alternate, and a huge amount of fun. Like, we're just really soaking wet, freezing cold, but like a million laughs, and they were pretty memorable times, and and we got some pretty decent blacks too. We got one that's probably 180 kilos on 8, which was a lucky tag shot, and then it just burnt us off in, gone, snap, that was it, thanks for coming sort of thing. But and I remember having a 3.5 hour fight on a black on 8, probably about 120 kilos, which was, was clearly bigger than the Australian record at the time, and it was foul hooked, and we just couldn't get its head around. And then after the line had broken, it just did 3 jumps up the side of the boat.
Just to give you a proper look.
Yeah. So it's what might have been sort of thing. But that was interesting that it came up to the top when the pressure came off, because Mike Levitt, who's famous light tackle American record chaser, he what's the magazine? Big Game Journal. I read an article where he said, if you get a stubborn fish, you got nothing to lose by putting a clicker on and knocking the reel into free spool and let it take a couple of 100 metres of line. And read that the same year as we had that black on and broke the line, but thought, we've got to give this a go. And honestly, it was particularly unfair, it seems, because stripes, especially, not so much the blacks, but the stripes would just, being a bit stubborn after an hour, you just put the clicker on, let them swim away, and they would come to the top.
Just like clockwork.
Yeah, pretty much. So the trouble was that people wanting to put them at free spool after 5 minutes going, no, you've got to earn it first. So, but yeah, it was a sneaky little technique that made such a difference. But even Rick and Peter Cook, who's the decky, it was a new line every morning, not using yesterday's line to caught a fish, top shotting it. And Rick used to joke about you could tell what line we had in the water by the join in the mono. Was it a plat? Was it a bimini? Was it a loop-to-loop connection? And who used to tie these, Rick? I think Pete is one of Pete's by the look of it as it's going through the guides. And we go, okay, yeah. But 94, that was my dream year. There was also a 106 kilo yellowfin and a 590 tiger shark. So it was sort of
all in the same year.
Yeah. So someone pointed that out to me the other day. I didn't realise it was all in the same year, but yeah.
Now that you've pointed it out, I can see it in my notes here. It's both got 1994 written. There you go.
Yeah. So but nice to have the ball on a string sometimes. But So. But it reached a point, and I had other mates from Melbourne that would come up and we'd go going fishing Bermagui and we catch him on 50-pound line for them. Yeah, it didn't wow me. After all, I go, how many more of these do we need to catch sort of thing. I'd rather go and fish for a blue than plonk around at the 12 mile catching them on 50. Or you put 8 kilo line in the water and set yourself a bit of a challenge. But they were great times. They really were.
So did you catch your record fish sort of in the first season of trying, or did you have to put a couple of years in? First day.
Yep.
Okay.
Graham and I had sort of talked about it at length. Oh, we should try this, and the Australian record was, I think it was 105. So only just beat it, but he went and had a practice the previous week, and they got one about 66 on 8 and went, we'll work out what we can do. And I still don't understand that particular day why we were towing a live striped tuna. I would have thought we'd be using slimies, but we've got a stripey like this, and for hours, I couldn't even find a hammerhead to eat it. And, you're holding 8 kilo line and it's just cutting in your fingers, and then I'd swap with Rick, and then finally it got eaten, and, gave it heaps of time to get the bait down. Of course, when we get it to the boat, it's hooked right there. So, we probably didn't need to. But we got I'm mystified by the lack of slimy use, but we caught a frigate that morning out at the 12 mile, put that out and hooked up straight away and spat the bait back at us. But I don't understand why plenty of times down there where the slimies are snapping all day, every day, bait rippling everywhere, and you go out the next morning and the bait's just completely disappeared.
Yeah,
so,
really.
Yeah, it's very, very strange. Doesn't happen a lot, fortunately, but it does. It does happen. So,
and that period of time was also sort of towards the tail end of the glory days of big yellowfin tuna fishing on the south coast. Is that sort of about that time?
Yeah. So the fish seemed to be getting bigger, like a number of 100 kilo fish caught. Yeah. Whereas, there's probably one over 90 a year down there. And the season finished a lot earlier too, like sort of June long weekend. That was probably the wrap up of the year, but now it seems the bite has shifted more into winter and spring.
So was that more of a summer fishery at the time?
Well, it was autumn really,
okay.
April onwards. But if you look at the old Narooma Convention videos, they were catching big yellowfin at Montague Island in March.
Yeah, okay.
So gradually over the years, the season moved further into winter. I don't know why, but, you know, to go there in March and go up to the island, fish for yellowfin, it didn't even enter your mind like that to do it. But they, you know, in those answer days, they were getting some mighty fish on terrible gear, and, you know, really doing the hard yards with, you know, not only with rods but the rod buckets and harnesses, and, you know, you thank Hank Newman for all that sort of stuff, and then you look at the boats, and, you know, there was someone had a de Havilland, they used to call the floating life bait tank, because, you know, there wasn't much more to it other than an outboard motor and a big bait tank in the middle and a centre console, and that was it. But yeah, it was definitely a gradual drift away to the winter months sort of thing. So, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And I mean, I'm sure plenty of people are familiar with what you're talking about there, but for anyone that may not be, this was sort of a more inshore fishery for yellowfin tuna on the south coast, primarily centred around sort of the Montague Island area.
Montague Island, the 4 Mile Reef, the pinnacles at the southern end of Montague. Not a lot of space for a lot of boats. Top end of the island is probably a bit different, but, yeah, there was plenty of fish caught out the shelf and over. But the bigger fish were definitely inshore, like the real big, like the 80 kilo fish and more. They were mostly in there and, you know, eating trawler discards. And, you know, people say, oh, you know, what happened to them inshore? And anyway, an ex-pro I know, his theory was that the inshore trawl fishery, as that slowly got shut down, that those big fish weren't in there, gathered there for feeding on the trawler scraps like they were before. And, yeah, so went back to more a shelf fishery sort of thing. So, yeah, but yeah, I mean, back in that era, if you wanted to catch a big fish, you were fishing inshore. So the island, the 4 Mile, somewhere like that. So, yeah.
And all bait fishing, live or dead bait?
Yep.
Cubes, burleying?
Live baiting with slimies, then, you know, cube trail of whatever you could get. And back in the early days, you could certainly get for a carton of beer, you get a box of trawler trash from the co-op, and, you know, using rat tails and Montague mullet, all that sort of thing. But having a nanny guy out under a balloon, that was dead set money in the bank. Like, they don't go off every day, but when they do, it's going to be a proper one. Like,
yeah, really.
You know, the 30 kilo fish aren't going to eat a nanny guy occasionally they would, but, you know, it was, yeah. So, and catching the goats was often harder than catching the yellowfin. Like, used to drive us, you know, to distraction. And these days with better electronics, you'd probably just pull up at the 4 Mile and go, oh, well, there they are there, and put a bait jig down, and, you know, you've got your, you know, if you had 6 in the tank, that you're a millionaire, and you didn't need to catch any more because, like I said, they don't go off all the time, but they do go off to a proper fish. Yeah, that was a secret with them. But, yeah, and then, you know, sort of using pilchards obviously as, you know, whole baits and that sort of thing. But it was bloody good fun. I loved it. And I used to go out with Johnny Jubb a lot, not fishing, but just sitting there cutting up burley basically. And, you know, and Jubby was he never gave anything away, but if you sat there and you paid attention, you'd go, oh, that's interesting. And, you know, after fishing, you know, if you caught a good one or whatever, you go to the pub with him afterwards, and people would try and pick his brains and buy him schooners, and he'd play a straight bat to all their questions, and I just sort of sit there with a little smile on my face because, you know, I know what he did, I know what they're trying to do, but this is not the way to get the information out of him. He's able to drink your beer though, but yeah. So, yeah. But no, it was great fun. And then, you know, when going back, I had the ultimate there, like, you know, we started fishing with him, and in the sort of late 80s to mid 90s, like, he had a dream run on big fish, like, just, yeah, like, had it really, really worked out. So, but using sort of more anchoring at the top of the island. Early days it was all drifting and sort of more anchoring. So yeah, but
and what were some of the little things that you noticed the guys doing that were catching more consistently and consistently bigger fish than the rest of the fleet? What were some of those little things that you saw that they did differently?
Dropping down in litre size. If you had to get the bite, the old saying, it's better to have fought and lost than to never fought at all. I remember Graham had a fish in the Burley, I wasn't on board, that wouldn't eat a litre, so they end up hooking it on 50-pound straight through to the hook and fought it for X amount of time, and it chewed through the mono. They're hoping for a corner hook, and it was one of those little semicircular eagle claws. And then a week later, Bill caught the fish with the hook in it. It was 80 kilos. So, just have to be able to mix it up a bit. And even litre length, litre size, a swivel, like sometimes the weight of the swivel sinking through the water column was too much. And,
really? So that was enough to make the bait look different?
Yeah. And the idea was, you try all sorts of different things, like throw in a heap of burley and put your bait on the lead with obviously a heavy leader or heavier-ish leader in it. So they go crazy and they hoover it all up. But so many times they eat every bit of bait, but the one with the hook in it, they go, no, not falling for that, not today. But you can go back the next day and they'd probably eat it the first time you put it in the water. But yeah, the swivel thing, a little bit of styrene foam in the ring or the snap if you're using a snap.
To offset the weight of the swivel. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
That's a good little...
And then I remember one day at the Pinnacles at Jubby, fish in the burley wouldn't eat. I just kept shying away at the last minute, and he had me walk the bait to the bow of the boat and drop it in. So when it came through, the water column was a little bit deeper and caught the fish straight away.
Wow.
It wasn't a very big fish, but I thought, that's interesting. Like,
just a little that one.
Yeah, for sure. So, just little tricks like that. And I got a long tail at the Pinnacles one day that 8 kilo line was a new line class, and this thing was a certain world record. And Tim Simpson was on board, and he had a TLD full of fluoro 8 kilo. We tried everything to catch that fish, and it just kept knocking it back, and went to like a 14'6", 40-pound torture trace with everything you could possibly do to make it,
stealth.
Sell the idea to the fish. No. So anyway, it got full of bait and disappeared. So I've got a 24, put a strip bait on, threw it out, and caught it straight away. It's just so annoying. I mean, I was glad to catch it, but it was so annoying that it might have been a different fish, but like I fed it out of sight, bang, got him on. Like it was just one of those things. But so anyway, that was 27.5 kilos, so it's a
big long tail.
That's a good long tail. So yeah.
And a lot of that fishery was sight based, wasn't it?
Like
fish
for
at the
sure.
back of the boat.
Yeah, like they were right at the back of the boat. Not always. Some days you wouldn't see them at all, but other days they were just like lined up. My best day out with Jubby, with Jim Allen and Brian Burke, we got 5. I got the 40 kilo fish, and they all got fish over 50. And they were just, just right there. It was just absolutely brilliant to see. So, and my big fish, when we put it in the boat and it was just starting to blow northwest, and we went back to the Dan Boy, and this was on the Ultimate, and threw some more burley in, and bang, there's another jumbo right there.
Wow.
And he just ate the bait straight out of my hands, basically, and fought it for 20 minutes. It was blowing hard northwest by this stage, and we ended up down the eastern side of the island, and in that time I never really got any line back. It was either stalemate or it was going, and then hook pulled round in and scuff mark like 30 centimetres up from the hook. So it was down somewhere
Right down,
soft.
yeah.
Yeah. So, so we all sort of wondered what that photo would look like with, 100 kilo fish and an 80 plus. I mean, it could have been another 100, I don't know, but it was a big fish, no question about it.
You probably would have been the only man alive to have potentially put 200 kilo plus yellowfin.
We could speculate about it all day, but it was, it was quite something. And then after that, they just disappeared. It's and now stick baiting and everything. Like they've had some spectacular fishing down there in recent times. That it was great to see photos of a big fish with Montague Island in the background. Like I never thought I'd see that again, but this time they've been caught on a spin reel on a stick bait, and you go, oh look, that's just
talk about making it hard.
Oh yeah. So anyway, but good on them. I think it's fantastic that
it does appear to be having a bit of a resurgence in terms of the numbers and the size. There's some good big fish around, but again, there's plenty of people that'll probably listen to this and they're well aware of the fishery that used to be, but guys that have maybe only got into the sport in the last 5 or 10 years probably don't even realise that there were 100 kilo yellowfin caught in Australia, New South Wales, and I wouldn't be able to. I mean, would you be able to put your finger on a rough? I mean, were they? Obviously, they would have never been a common capture, but were there a handful of those 100 kilo plus fish caught each year, or was it sort of a less common occurrence than that?
Probably towards getting to the mid 90s, I suppose there was probably 2 or 3 over 100 each year, or maybe 1 or 2.
Yeah.
It certainly wasn't dozens by any means, but still plenty of
good 1 or 2
great fish.
Season,
yeah, and a lot of that era, like. People were struggling with sort of the Hank Newman rod bucket and leather shoulder harness and a full-length aluminium AFCO butt and a full-length rod. And then when sabre rods had been in Australia for many years before that, but the strokers, when Dennis Braid sort of brought them out with his rod buckets and harnesses, like you go, what is this about? Like, how good is this? And I remember he left a brown 6455 XXH in the Modern Fishing office with a braid manta belt and harness, and everyone goes, "Oh, that's doing my head in. That's too weird, that setup." But I took it to Lord Howe, and we're all using standard length rods and standard length rod bucket and horrible rod bucket and harnesses, and this stuff like. Everyone wanted to use it. It was such a revelation. And then sort of Ian Miller sort of started getting into when sabre became more available in Australia. Like he was sort of at the forefront of the short rod revolution, and to put a bent butt on one, which was quite popular in the States at that time, that was really quite something. And I might have caught the first marlin on a mini bent butt in Australia, and this was about the time when Harbour Tackle Supply was starting up. And, so I got 114 blue before Christmas off Port Hacking and on the short mini bent butt. And I've gone, how good is this?
Pretty revolutionary tackle at the time.
And I've been a bent butt fan ever since. Like I see people struggling with straight butt 80s and an 80 wide, and I go, oh, that's hard yakka. Like that's a back cracker sort of thing. But and like I said, I've been a bent butt fan ever since. And then sabre gradually really captured that marketplace in Australia, and a lot of other manufacturers were trying to do it, but weren't even coming close to what these rods offered. They weren't. They were certainly better for, probably not so good for game marlin fishing, lure trolling, but still better than using a full length straight rod. Like really, really
better for fighting the fish. Potentially not as good for setting hooks in lures and things like that. But once you had him on, and they still are. Still probably the best fish fighting tool. Not specifically sabre, obviously they are, but any of the current sort of all of Ian Miller's current stuff's gone another level ahead again. But
So
that original stroker style action is still sort of the industry standard for fighting big game fish.
Yeah, yeah. So, but and I, like I said, I've been a fan of them ever since. And on my boat these days, we fish 4 bent butt 80s with 50 wides with Dacron with mono top shots, which people say, why don't you use 80 wides? I said, well, they're a bit ungainly. There's the Talica option, which, is probably, I've got Tiagras that seem to do the job most of the time. And I would love to have 550 Talicas, but, I'm happy with the setup we've got. And we've had a few near tragic spool jobs in the first few minutes, but each time we've managed to, get enough line to, save the day sort of thing. But it's a 50 wide reel, 80 pound rod. It's like, it's a good, comfortable package really. And with the Black Magic stuff now too, of course, as long as it's all, the butter's in the right pin and the harness is under the angler's backside, like it's good.
Set up correctly.
Yeah, exactly. Because I see some on YouTube and I just I cringe. Like that's making it so much harder for them, or they're upside down, or that sort of thing. So yeah, but.
Yeah, that's always a bit of an issue, trying to fight them upside down on a roller rod. But yeah, look, those 50 wide LRS reels, they do, as you say, the way you're spooling them with a Dacron, or some guys will use braid as the backing, you've still got a shitload of line capacity. And I know you fish with some female anglers and juniors and, smaller framed people on board, so I imagine an outfit like that's a little bit easier for them to get out of the covering board and into the harness. So,
sure. And I'll be sort of, driving a boat or doing something, getting another line in, and someone will say, I'm getting spooled. No, you're not. I'm getting spooled. Oh, shit, you are getting spooled. All right, hang on a sec. I better get after this one and, turn the boat, put her back on pilot, pull the rest of the gear in sort of thing. But the ones that have really emptied the reels over the years, usually just drive straight up to them and they're there. Like they've run themselves out. But, sometimes you fight them and the mono, all you're fighting them on is the mono top shot. Like they haven't gone that far. So, it's good fun though.
And some of those near spool jobs, I imagine too, aren't always from the biggest fish, are they?
No, not at all. Yeah. Like, an angry 100 kilo fish, can do a line burn with the best of them. So, yeah, but, so you just, yeah. And the thing that is so attractive about blue marlin fishing is the aggressive bite, and then the full-on kamikaze charge at the boat or up the side of the boat or whatever. And, we had one a couple of months ago that was all over in 30 seconds, but we all just went, wow. And Mick Peen and Greg Peen, old-time Coffs Harbour game fishermen, they were just blown away by how exciting it all was. But that was it for the day. But we're all pretty popped, after that. Like, it was just, that was all right. So yeah.
So given the breadth of your game fishing experience between bill fishing, tuna, big sharks, you did do shark fishing at a period of time through the 90s there, and as you mentioned, did catch a 590 kilo tiger shark, which is 1,300 pounds. Was that on 15 kilo?
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's a 20-to-1 fish. But would you say blue marlin are your sort of favourite?
Yeah. I think if there was the inshore yellowfin fishery, I'd still be, keen to do that, but definitely blue marlin. So
and moving to Sydney in the mid-'80s, you would have sort of been there for the early part of that sort of blue marlin revolution as it started down there, right?
So, and guys that were going over the HIBT, so you've got Joe Ritchie, you've got Arch Livingston, Peter Godby, and others that are all going, well, this should work in Australia. And there were definitely blues caught there. Back in those early days, most of the big blues caught ate a whole striped tuna or mullet on, 28 foot or 1,000-pound shark cable. But, they've come back with the gear and the ideas and everything. And all guys that were really committed to catching Blue Marlin, and the ultimate goal being 1,000-pound Blue Marlin off the east coast. So, and I'm always rapt to see that there's still people committed to that goal, and they're fishing 130s and they're not mucking around like it's 12 inches is a small lure, and 14 and 16 because weeds out the little ones,
and it needs to be able to carry big hooks and heavy leader too.
Yeah, exactly right. So and then sort of that era, like the trend, more lure trolling than bait fishing. If you think of the Interclub, it was pottering around out the front with two live slimies out and that sort of thing, and all of a sudden boats were going wide and coming in with some pretty amazing fish. And then at the same time, harbor tackle supply started up, and the two Chris's were just like enamoured of Hawaiian lures, and that's sort of where I became a bit hooked on it all too. That some of these beautiful works of art that you look at back now, and definitely everyone was on the right track, but putting these beautiful lures out on 15 kilo was definitely not the right track. I mean, there was some great fish caught, don't get me wrong, but a lot of tragedy along the way as well. Big fish dead, can't lift them. 15 kilo rod just bends a bit more when you push the drag up, and it's just, yeah. And then about that time, like the Hawaiian International Billfish Tournament used to throw a airfare and accommodation at the magazine if you wanted to come over and cover the HIBT. So, really? Yeah.
If I have to,
yeah. The first year I went, I had the choice of going to Finland to go to look at the Rapala and Nilsmaster factories, or go to the HIBT. And I went to the HIBT, which in hindsight was a mistake, because as long as Continental Airlines were flying into Australia, we were getting a free ticket anyway. And then Dick Hewson, Shane Mensforth and Steve Starling went to Finland and had a wow of a time.
It was about there actually two pretty hard trips to try and pick one over the other.
Yeah,
actually.
That's right. And that was a one-off too, so it didn't come up again. So, the boys had a great time over there. And, you'd think Rapala and Nilsmaster are direct competitors, but there was quite a bit of cooperation between the two companies, they were saying. Like, it's not, the Hatfields and McCoys constantly at war. They actually supportive of each other. I thought that was interesting. But yeah, so
sometimes you need to share resources. Like Pakula and I do that. I mean, we're both local, so it helps. But if I run out of hooks, I ring him. If he runs out of swivels, he rings me.
Yeah.
Like it makes life a bit easier sometimes to be able to share the resources.
Keeps the product on the shelves, so you're not sitting around waiting for something to turn up so you can finish it off. But then the HIBT, I mean, that was like, no one does razzmatazz like the Americans do. And like I read the articles by Goby and that, and I knew what to expect, but this was like unbelievable. It's the organisation, and like they were getting 80 teams for it back in those days, and street parade, and you'd sort of teams from all over the world.
It was about genuine international
Absolutely,
tournament.
Yeah. Not in name at all. It was genuinely international. And Kailua Town Pier, which is straight out at the front of the King Kamehameha Hotel, that was the epicentre of it all, even though the marina is probably 7 or 8 miles up the coast. And you'd rock up in the morning, and you'd either get on a press boat, or if you knew one of the teams, you'd sort of say, "Oh, can I come along with you tomorrow?" and jump on board and hope and get a few photos. But just to go fishing in calm weather every day, like it's just like they're so spoiled, like it's. But and then you'd sort of all the carry on, and there'd be a flag raising ceremony before the first day for all the teams and all that sort of stuff, and. But of a morning, like they'd say, oh, well, the such and such team go to position 0, and then they get on the boat and they'd wait for the shotgun start, and there'd be a prayer before fishing and that sort of thing, which is all pretty, a bit different. I don't think that would ever caught on in Australia. But Gary Eoff, who makes Marlin Magic lures, he'd be down there in the morning, big sheet of ply with nails in it. lure heads, and like you go, oh, what you got today, Gary? And you go, oh, I've got this, and this, and I go, oh, that's nice. And, how much for this? Yeah, $18. I've only got 15. Oh, that'll be right, So, and then we back down the next day, and like it was. I've still got quite a few
original wares.
Yeah, absolutely, like 35-plus-year-old lures that I still run, and and that's not even talking about Joe Yee's, which you're going to Kona, you're buying Joe Yee's, and back in that era. Anyone that knew you were going over there who was getting into the Blue Marlin fishing scene off Sydney in particular, could you bring me back an 80 wide? The Shimano wasn't on probably the TTS reels were just starting to appear, but so you'd have an 80 wide spooled with 80-pound line in your luggage to come back to Australia, as well as
a dozen lures.
Skirts and more T-shirts than you could ever hope to wear, Sperry top-sided deck shoes, and the dollar wasn't at parity by any means, but it was reasonably good. So it was a shopping trip as much as anything else.
Well, and that was at that period wasn't at all to do with trying to save money or circumvent the system. It would genuinely because a lot of that tackle wasn't readily available here, was it?
No.
As you say, you had Harbord. I'm sure you had the Complete Angler doing some sort of product in that market, but it was still in its infancy, wasn't it?
Absolutely. It was just Harbord in particular were just starting to get cranked up, and then all of a sudden it was the sort of the lures I'd bought in Hawaii, I was now seeing in Australia. But even things like lure skirts. I mean, we all talk about having a time machine and buying up all the golden bait Yamashita skirts of the colours you can't get anymore. And
I've still got about 500 out there.
Oh, have you? I'll have a look later. Yeah. But all that sort of stuff, it was an incredibly exciting time. And then the guys I fished with, I used to be so pissed off when we go shark fishing. And I go, just why are we doing this? And, then I did catch a pretty nice tiger out of it all. But
that's a worthy capture. That one. That's pretty special
for sure. So, but the funny thing is, for someone who hung shit on shark fishing for my entire Sydney fishing career, I caught a tiger bigger than everyone else's, and I know it grinds a few people still. But anyway, but that was a big box head, that one. So we've sort of didn't really grasp how big it was until we tried to put it on board. And we had a transom door, not a can-sized transom door, but big enough. And one of the guys on board kept saying, "This is 1,000 pounds. This is 1,000 pounds." It's not that big. It's nice, big tiger. It's 300 plus. And then he said, we skidded that 380 that we got at the Interclub in through the door and had the door shut behind it, and this thing we can't even get its head in through the door. I went, oh, yeah, okay, well, you might be right. You might be right. And then, once we got to the weigh station and started pulling it out of the water and going,
started growing.
It got bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and just, quite amazing. But Simon DeMarchi's 30 plus years on. The poor old jaws were looking a bit sad, so I gave them to Simon DeMarchi a few years ago, and he's doing them up, so they'll look be worthy to put back on the wall in the next little while. But they're actually wide enough that I can fit through them without touching the sides. So that's a good set of choppers. So
they're still swimming around out there too.
Oh yeah, for sure. But then last weekend there was no tigers caught at the Interclub.
Yeah, really.
Which is I can't understand why, but they'll probably be everywhere next weekend. But
that's right. And they sort of. There's actually been, I was about to say quite a lot, but there's never a lot of large sharks weighed, but especially not these days. But there are some significant fish being caught, even in the modern era, like 600 kilo plus fish.
Yeah. There's been some absolute horses. So, it's the smell. I can smell it in my mind. The mullet and everything else, and Shark
fishing was my introduction to game fishing for the first 3 or 4 seasons, and I can still taste the mince.
I reckon my farts smelled of shit mullet for
I
the
was
next
going to
couple
say
of
that
days.
you still smell like burley 4 days later. So it's it's good when you're young.
Yeah, for sure. And it's probably going to be the biggest thing you'll ever catch, short of going up to Cairns. So
Absolutely.
yeah. But I Monday morning back in the office, I'd be on the phone checking in with everybody else. What you see, what you catch, blah, 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 because we had no mobile phones back then. And I'd be there picking the crud out from under my nails. And then Ian Miller gave me a set of his rod tools for flattening the threads before you
the
put
thread
the pops.
picks.
Yeah. So I gave them as a Christmas present. So I just sit there using them to scrape the gunk out. And now whenever I pull my boat out of the water and end up with anti-foul under my nails, I still use them to get them sort of, slightly tidied up, but that smell. It's just...
It's an experience, and it's a lot of work.
Oh, absolutely.
You're loading 300-400 kilos of burley on board every morning, and getting out there and sort of knee deep in that shit all day long. It's they can be long days.
Yeah, for sure. And then there's what you catch dealing with that afterwards too. So. But I mean, we sort of used to have you're on the burley bucket and you're chopping pillies, and then you're on strike on the shallow bait, and then you're on next half hour you're on the deep bait, and then we go around
rotate,
like that.
Yep.
So until we sort of hooked up, but it's it's an acquired taste, but I never really acquired it. But if the yellowfin came into the burley, that was always good fun too, like multiple hookups and walking around the boat, and it's a bit like the old days of the Peak and, famous boats from Sydney game fishing, like with Jack 3 and that, where, multiple rods all loaded up at the same time, and, and then a mako turns or blue shark turns up at the burley bucket, so you've got to deal with that as well. And, it was a lot of fun, it really was.
It's probably one of the most... I'm trying to look for the right word, but... the anticipation of not knowing when your deep bait goes off or your wide bait goes off, if you didn't see it fin on the surface or anything, and if you just saw that float break off or your deep bait started doing the slow growl away, that immediate sort of feeling in your stomach of what is it?
Yep.
And how big is it?
Yeah.
And that's a until you've sort of experienced it, it's hard to explain the level of anticipation of, this could be a rat or it could be a 1,300-pound tiger shark.
Well, that particular day, we pulled up in 90 fathoms, started burling, and then the bow rod's gone off, and looked up, and it's a bloody fish trap. So I've gone.
Or it could be a fish trap.
Yeah. So I've gone up front and I'm winding the line back on the reel, and then fortunately it wasn't hooked and untangled it and moved away from it. Went back to burling, and the dolphin fish that were under it have all come into the burley, and as we've drifted away, they've followed us, and they're only sort of 800 long, but there was a lot of them, and basically you put a pilly on a yellowfin trace and just flick them over the side, and there's dollies going everywhere. And anyway, next thing, the front rod's gone off again. I said, seriously? Not again. So I've gone up the front, pushed the drag up, and Carl Skip had started the boat, and I can't see the trap. Anyway, the line is travelling around on the surface. And I said, we've got something on here. And he said, what do you think it is? I said, I don't know, it's not very big. And,
famous last words.
Yeah, exactly right. So, but we had the leader up at 30 minutes, and then it was another hour before it popped up again. But, and that one went like clockwork, sort of hooked cleanly. But, over the years we've had some shocking long fights on 15 where the second hook has ended up in the cheek and you're not pulling them straight, and you get them so close and then they just pull away each time. I had a really big one off Port Stephens. We had a marlin on 10 kilo, and this tiger bit it in half right behind the boat. We're fishing for sharks, and the marlin ate a pilly. Anyway, I just threw a mullet in, and he's just thank you, I have that. And that was a dreadful marathon fight into the dark and on a long rod too. So, it was
Very
just,
comfortable.
Yeah. So,
And that one came unstuck.
Yeah. Broke line after, I don't know however long, been too long. It was definitely dark. So, yeah. But no, certainly full credit to the guys that go shark fishing because
it's hard work.
So much work, Marlin fishing, you got the lures out. You can open a beer, sit back, just watch the spread, go and have a sleep, do whatever. There's not really much time for that in shark fishing.
No.
So, yeah.
No, the marlin fishing, you can make it work or you can sort of simplify the process and make it pretty cruisy.
Yeah,
but shark fishing, there's not really a way to
there's
make
no
that easy.
shortcuts
There's
with
work
it.
to be done all day.
Yeah, for sure. So, but just organising the burley and all that. Like I got a phone call come back from Melbourne on Boxing Day and I got a phone call from one of the guys. Said, "Oh, where are you?" I said, "Oh, I'm at the airport." Oh, you're no use to me. I said, "Oh, why? What's wrong?" He said, "Oh, the freezer's gone off at the factory and everyone's going to walk off site unless something's done about it." And it was an old, we used to keep all that burley in an old petrol station ice freezer. Anyway, it was out in the open and it's just cooked the compressor. And I said, we'll get the wire traces. I had rig baits and stuff. So get all the wire traces out there. And he said, I can't get within 100 feet of it without dry reaching. I said, "Oh, really?" He said, yeah. And so what I failed to neglect to say was that I was actually at the airport in Sydney coming home, not like I'm on the plane going somewhere. So in the end, they had to get a forklift and put it on the back of a truck and take it to the tip and just dump the whole lot. And that hurt. Like we had all the baits and burley and, we had to start afresh with, But we used to buy mullet from a wholesaler at Botany who the mullet were for export to the Middle East somewhere, and they'd only taken the roe out of them.
Yep.
They're all sort of female fish, so the roe was the prize part of the fish, and the mullet, I don't know what they were going to do with it over there, but certainly I don't think there was any shark fishing going on over there. And you'd shop around for prices, and you could go through the whole mince thing with stuff from the fish market. But I always thought mullet were a slightly less offensive way of shark fishing, and they used to mash down pretty well too. Like end of the day, you'd only just have the skins in the bottom of the bucket. But not my cup of tea. And nowadays, we just seem to be seeing more and more sharks. Even at Coffs, I'm snapper fishing last year, lost a couple of fish to sharks, which is the first time ever. And this year, I've had a couple of bites just switch off when the sharks have turned up. So, and I had a marlin a few weeks ago eaten by white tips, which is
Off Coffs.
Yep.
Yeah,
just
okay.
a pack of little bastards, about metre and a half long.
That's pretty unusual for New South Wales waters.
Yeah.
I know a couple of guys here on the Gold Coast have had small black marlins eaten too, which is something that's never really been a thing here. So, yeah, I don't think there's any great secret to anyone that spends any time on the ocean. But there's certainly an issue with the shark population.
Yeah. Well, I mean, 25 years ago, fishing at Southwest Rocks with Vic Levitt, double header on blacks, got mine, fighting his, and saw the rod tip go. I said, "You've just been sharked." He said, No, I still got it. No, right. Cranked up half a 70-kilo black marlin, and having been in Cairns that previous year and seen sharks eating the fish off the line, the rattle of the rod tip, you go, "Oh no, I know what that is." And anyway, so that was the first and only one I'd ever experienced in New South Wales until a few weeks ago. And there's a boat 100 metres away from us, Spiro's getting in the water, so we drove over there and showed them. Didn't faze them.
They're pretty fearless, those guys.
But the blood dripping on top of the guy's head who was already in the water, he said, "Hey, mate." "Oh, yeah, sorry about that." He's like, And they were saying that, like, lots of big whalers there, but they were after the cobias that were swimming with the sharks. And we had a quick chat with them and like, what's the shark's reaction to the spearing? And he said, well, sometimes they just swim along and then couldn't care less, and other times it was just straight away they're like twitchy, and you sort of got to watch yourself then. But so it's definitely a problem, and people that deny it just haven't got any clue whatsoever.
Well, they've obviously not spent any time at all on the water, because it doesn't take long these days out there to have one under the boat in most places up and down the East Coast.
And this fish of mine, like, it was 15 minutes on 130, and they got it close, and probably a lighter drag setting, it might have been able to outrun them, but I run into a brick that they would have been waiting for it when we let it go. So
it's also not something you really think of off Coffs Harbour.
No, not at all. So, and I'm sure there are any amount of sharks there, or that much reef, and you've got sort of great snapper and deep water fish like barcod and blue eye and all that, harp hookers and that sort of thing. Like, it's tailor made for tigers, and of course there's been plenty of whites there over the years as well. I've only seen one there since I've lived there, and that was only a relative pup of 3 metres that just bobbed up at the back of the boat one morning while we're snapper fishing, and Steve Starling was with me. He said, "Hey, look at this," and there it was, like full-on jaws, just swam straight up to the back of the boat, and we're going, "Oh yes!"
Wow.
And he and it just cruised around the back of the boat, just checking us out, doing the old roll of the head and eyeballing you and that sort of thing, and then we could have tagged it 100 times, and then are we allowed to? Because you're not allowed to interact with them, and so Steve rang his wife, and she found out that no, we couldn't even put a tag in it, which is a bit annoying. But and if anyone ever wants to know what colour shark shit is, it's lime green. And I mean full-on glow bait green, because this thing just did this wiggle, and next thing there's all this green stuff drifting away in the current. And that's done a shit. That was truly bizarre. But there's a bit more to that story, in that Steve and I had a great mate, Rob Croxon, who was a keen amateur fisherman and used to actually write for Fishing World way back in the 80s. And Rob was one of those guys that couldn't get enough fishing into his life, so he started, he had a marlin broadbill down at Bermagui, and he started rod and reeling kingfish and a bit of trapping, and then it gradually grew into a longlining career back in the very early days of longlining in Australia. And then he gradually worked out that that's all way too much hard work. You're better off being the fish broker on shore and selling a bit of hooks and lights and that sort of stuff. But so Anzac Day 1985, just before I moved to Sydney in May, so April 85 at Bermagui on the 4 Mile, we raced out there and just go to fish for yellowfin, and then probably come in at lunchtime and go to the pub and play tour. And there was a boat out there already, and he got on the radio and he said, "Oh, we've just had a white shark stick its head over the side of the boat." And we could see it was 200 metres away, so it's probably a mako. So we've cruised over there, and then the back of the boat, the colour just changed. I'm going, "Look at this thing." Anyway, it could get so Rob's broadbill had twin 85 Johnsons on it, and could get the whole leg in its mouth. And it just went like that and shook the boat. As we're pulled up by this stage, and it hung around for a while, and Steve had caught a 10-pound red on a strip bait. Well, fishing for when we first stopped out there fishing for yellowfin, and this thing's just swimming around the back of it was doing circles around the boat, and we measured it as it went down the side, and it was 16 feet, so it was a proper one. And then we pulled the outrigger pole out, and we kept splashing this snapper in front of it, and we got some really good photos of head out of the water type stuff.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, but so anyway, poor old Rob ended up dying of liver cancer not long before we saw this white shark up at Coffs Harbour, and but anyway, got some good photos, and I said, you know that was Rob reincarnated as that white shark, don't you? And he said, oh, of course it was. Yes, it all fits. So, yeah. But, yeah, it was only a pup, this one, compared to the other one. But, yeah. So,
what are the chances that you'd see one with the same bloke on the boat with you?
That's right. Yeah.
They're actually super rare. You
Yeah.
know, I've only ever seen one in 25 years on the ocean. And a lot of people never get to see
That's
one
right.
in the wild. But the fact that both you and Steve were on the boat for 2 separate occasions, that's pretty unusual too.
And hundreds and hundreds of kilometres apart from the last one. So, yeah. But, that was a pretty amazing thing. Oh, and Steve got some photos with his Nokonis, an underwater camera. Then we pulled the door out of the back of the Broadbill, and Rob and I held his ankles while he took some photos of it swimming past and got some pretty cool shots of it. But that was before we'd started teasing it with the snapper, because we thought, there'll be a turning circle like the Queen Mary, we'll be able to pull him back on board. Steve was a bit, thinner in those days, weren't we all? But anyway, once we started stirring it up, a bit like a Blue Marlin, like this skin could wheel around like that quickly.
Wow.
Yeah. And Rob and I discussed, we might have just been pulling a couple of stumps in at the end there, but So, but that was an amazing experience. It really was. So, it was another full-on Jaws sort of moment, but which is still my favourite fishing film, by the way. It's like, Jaws was sort of like the old Brown Fenwick and the Penn Senator, and they're going click, click. And I don't think I've ever seen a shark go click, click with a reel before, or pick up a bait before like that. But yeah, so anyway, all good.
Well, mate, we're just hitting about the hour mark, so we might take a bit of a break, and we'll wrap up this as part 1 and come back shortly for part 2.
Sounds good to me.
Thank you, mate.
All right.